Hi and welcome. In this tutorial I want to show you how to create a movie in which a spider crawls out of my ear. It's a bit disgusting, I know, but I'm sure you all want to know how you can do this. Okay, let me explain the setup, the basic setup, and I can't cover every detail in this tutorial, but I will explain the basics and I will come back to you with more details about all the things you have to know. First of all, you have a movie and not a simple image. And you want to let this spider crawl out of the ear, and this means this 3D object, the spider, has to be masked for particular areas. And this is the first thing I want to show you, how to use masks for movies. In previous tutorials we used masks for images, and now we will use it for movies. And there's a difference, of course, because a movie, as the name implies, moves. Okay, have a look at this. So here's my movie in the movie clip editor, and I want to create a mask around this area here, because in this area we don't see this spider, so we have to mask it. And I created a mask like I did in the previous tutorials, just by holding the Control key and adding points to the mask. So this would be fine for an image, but this is not an image. This is a movie and it contains 160 frames. And when we are moving through the frames, of course the ear will change the position and we have to adjust this mask. This can be done in many ways. For example, I can just grab one point for a particular frame and adjust it every single point, like I do this here. Then I move to the next frame, see if the mask matches, and if not, I can, for example, press A key and just select all the points and move the whole mask around to make it fit. Another possibility is to use tracking. You will see what this is later in the video, so that you define tracking points and make this mask a child of the tracking points, and it will adjust automatically. But for this simple video I will go through the frames and adjust the mask manually. And finally I went through all the frames and adjusted my mask, and now I have to define a so-called tracking. You can switch here in the movie clip editor to tracking and define a tracking point. So why do I need this tracking point? Well, my goal is to combine 3D objects with this movie. And this movie is recorded with a camera that is moving around, and the actor, in this case me, is also moving around. And there has to be one point, at least one point, for the 3D objects as a kind of guide. They have to stay at a relative position to this point. And that's why I add here this tracking point. You can do this by pressing the Control key and just click right into your footage or into your movie to define this tracking point. The algorithms of Blender work in a way that they try to find this point again, this location, this relative location for the next frames. So this point has to be placed somewhere in your image or in your movie where it could be recognized again, because there is a higher contrast of the colors or something like this. And when I press this right arrow button here to run my tracking for the movie and for this tracking point, Blender will tell me if it found the tracking point for all the frames, and in this case it stops at frame number 3. It lost the tracking point. I don't know why, but you can adjust it a little bit. Move to this frame and I press the G key and adjust a little bit this marker. And now it stopped again at around frame 18, and again I press the G key and move it to the position that I want to be tracked. One more time and drag again, and now it moves through all the frames and the tracking was successful. And when I scrub now through this movie, you can see that the tracking point doesn't lose its position, and this is what I was going for. Now I have my tracking point, my reference point, but it is not in my scene. So what I want to do now is I want to create an object for my scene that matches to this tracking point. So I move to Solve and I click Link Empty to Scene. And this creates a new object for my scene that is related to this tracking point. Switch to the 3D view and here you can see my objects. Here is my spider object, fully rigged, and I will add animation for this later on. And then I have a plane, or almost a plane. I try to mimic a little bit the shape of the ear, just to catch the shadows that the spider will cast on this ear when it is crawling out of it. And here you see when I move through the frames with my timeline marker that the plane and the spider will change their position in relation to the actor. And this is what I want to avoid, and therefore I will select the spider and the plane, and at last this empty track object we just created, like that. And then I'm pressing Ctrl P, to set an offset of the spider and the plane to this empty track object. And now when I move through the frames, you can see that the plane and the spider keep their relative position. And this is why we added this tracking. I know this looks a little bit tedious and complicated, but as soon as you got used to it, it feels quite natural. Okay, now let's move this spider out of the ear, create simple animation. For this first animation, I will just change the position of the object. Later on, I will switch to pose mode and move the bones around so that it feels like the spider is crawling. Okay, now I just change the position. So I move to the frame number 15 now and move it in the direction out of this ear. I can also switch here in my little preview window to rendered mode to see if the shadows are casted correctly. Then I again snap to orthographic view, move to the first frame and set the initial position for the spider. You have to keep in mind that we defined the mask, and in this preview here in the 3D view, of course you can't see that the spider is hidden at the frame we are currently in. But when we render this, then the spider won't be visible at this position here, because there is the mask hiding this 3D object. I will show later on how to define the node setup to make this possible. And I tell you what, I will also upload the node setup to my Patreon account, and if you're my patron, you can just download it and make your own movies like this one. Okay, now just adjust the position of the spider for my frames. I also will rotate it a little bit. And I will do this till I reach the end frame. The end frame is currently 160. And now let's render one frame. Press F12. This is the frame number 15, where the spider is almost crawled completely out of my ear. And here you can see what is rendered. The plane is rendered and the spider. And now I'll switch to the node editor to show you the node setup to make this render possible. In the first frame is my footage. Then I have a frame for the mask to mask out the footage by using a mix node. Then I have my 3D objects rendered and overlaid. And in the last frame I have my shadow layer. This is a setup you already know from previous tutorials, and as I said, I will upload this node setup to my Patreon account so that you can plug in your own 3D objects, your own shadow layers, your own footage, and create movies like this. Now what is missing? Change to 3D view again to create a spider animation. We already created this simple animation where I just change the location of the spider, but of course I want to make it look more natural, that the spider is crawling, and therefore I have to switch to pose mode and move through my frames. And perhaps every 5 frames I will change the rotation and position of the bones for the spider's arms to create the impression that this spider is really crawling out of my ear. I also switch here to the dope sheet where I can see my keyframes that are already added, and now with automatic keyframes enabled I select the bones in pose mode and change position and location of these bones. Now I'm doing this for frame number 15. Just apply rotation. And then I'm going to do the same procedure for the next frame. In this example it's frame number 18, I think. And yeah, and so on and so forth till I reach the end of the movie and my crawling animation is completed. Okay, here I'm back. I completed the animation for the spider, and now we can render this movie. Before I render, I scrub through the timeline to get a preview of my animation, and once I'm happy with it, I set my render settings. How to do this you can see in one of my previous tutorials about compositing. It's really simple. And yeah, I rendered this out and I switched to 114 frames, not 160. I shortened this a little bit, and this is the result. So I really hope you liked this tutorial. As I said, it is a kind of overview, but I will come back to you with tutorials to cover the details that are not mentioned in this tutorial. Please subscribe to my channel. Here's the link. And I also added links to previous tutorials, for example on defining the render settings or other compositing techniques. Thanks a lot for watching, and as I said, I uploaded the node setup to my Patreon account. Thanks for watching and see you soon.